Good afternoon. My name is Larry Smoot Jr., and I'm the author of the C Trilogy series of books. The first is the Centennial 2029. The second is the Chronicles of His Story. The third is the Comforter and Spirit of Truth. Now, I also produced a stage play, Family Secrets, and filmed a movie which is yet to be named and is in the editing stages, due out by the end of summer 2026. Both the movie and the stage play were adaptations of Book 1, the Centennial 29. That book took place in the year 2029 around the 100th celebration of the Smoot Family Reunion, which is why we're here today, to highlight the uniqueness of an African American family that has come together every year since the Great Depression of 1929, which only happened to be a coincidence and not a catalyst for the reunion. For a post-emancipated Black family in the Jim Crow South of the 1920s, depression was a way of life. Yet, with a steady beat, have not our weary feet. We have come to a place where our fathers and grandfathers and Big Mama not only sighed, but flourished. As a fourth generation Smoot, I can tell you our history. Milton Smoot was born a slave in Tazewell, Virginia in 1842. In 1863, Milton married Sarah. In 1871, Milton, Sarah, and their two sons, Joe and Isaac, moved to the newly formed state of West Virginia and settled in Boone County. Milton was talented and started a sawmill where he sold timber all the way from Madison to St. Albans by floating the wood down the Little Cold River. That allowed him to buy 300 acres of land, and that's where he raised his then 9 children. They were Joe, Isaac, John Reese, Henry Matt, Andrew Jefferson, Elbert, Thomas Richard, Fanny, and Dora. In 1929, the family was scattered all over the country, and some of them weren't even getting along with each other. John Reese went to his older brother Joe and said that we need to get the whole family back together. That's when they had their first family reunion in 1929. John Reese, who was a minister, used the parables of 2 is greater than 1 found in Ecclesiastes. He had 9 sticks on the table, and he said each stick represents one of the siblings. Individually, a stick can be broken. Even if you had 2 or 3 of those sticks put together, they can be broken. If all 9 sticks stood together, it would form a bond that no man can break. That's where we get our tagline of strength, there's strength in unity, and the logo of 2 fists holding a bundle of sticks together. On the cover of Book 1, the Centennial 29, you will see a picture of that first reunion back in 1929. If it's not obvious, I love my family history. So much so that I decided to do an interview of the elders a couple years ago. At the time, I had the perfect couple. Ronald Smoot, who's our oldest male, and Carolyn Jean Matthews, who is our oldest female, both born in the year 1929 and were present at the very first reunion. Although Carolyn Jean Matthews was born in October, she was in the womb at the time while Ronald was born in February, so he was there. As fate would have it, procrastination got the best of me, and they are no longer available. They are both in good spirits, but they are technically in hospice care. So today, I have with me my family historians, Doug Smoot and Joseph Saunders. My first question to the both of you all is, coming down here, the very first thing you see every year that you come down is you look at the memorial board and see if there's any new names on there, but not necessarily new names. I just enjoy looking at the bold names there, the founding fathers, and to me, they're like rock stars. Did either of you two have an opportunity to know of, meet any of the elders or founding fathers of the reunion?
Yes, I met several of them.
Oh, okay.
Yes, after thinking about it, I made a list of them.
Okay.
And the more I listed, the more I remembered.
Okay.
For example, the first founder was J.W. Smoot, J.W. and Nora Smoot, and Nora was my grandmother. And I knew her very well. I grew up across the lane, we call it the lane, from my grandmother, Nora Smoot. And I knew her all the way up till she passed away in 1968. The next founder that I knew was Isaac Smoot. I knew Isaac Smoot. He lived down in Madison. And sometimes we would go to Sunday school. My father would send him some things. And I can describe him. He was a distinguished looking guy. He was short, slightly built, and he wore wire round glasses, small lenses. And that always stood out. And he had been a postman for the city of Madison. That was one of his jobs.
Okay.
The next person that I knew, the founder was Thomas R. Smoot and Lula Smoot. And Thomas was famous for his fiddling and also calling those dances that they did back then. He was well known, and people sought him all over southern West Virginia to come and call those square dances.
Wow.
He had a very rhythmic voice, a very nice baritone voice, and his wife was Lula Smoot. And I can remember she would come to every reunion, and she would stand up when they were have people to stand up and make some type of remark. She would stand up and talk about how proud she was to be a Smoot. Very, very proud to be a Smoot. The next founder that I knew and met was Albert and Ella Smoot. Albert Smoot, he was a construction worker, a builder, and he lived in downtown Madison. But when I was very young, they moved to Burlington, Ohio. But I can remember very well my father and my older brother walking to his home in Madison to watch the Friday night fights. That was popular back then. That was very popular sport. Boxing was big back then because of people like Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, and all of those guys. And Aunt Ella would always, I would be anxious to get there because she would always have a lot of refreshments. And we would just eat all evening long. And I remember that so very, very well. I was sorry to see them leave Madison to go to live in Burlington, Ohio. I think the reason why they moved is because they had a daughter that lived in Burlington. All right, the next person that I knew was Frances Smoot. Her husband's initials were JR or something like that. I can't remember, but it's on the board. We called her Auntie. Everybody called her Auntie. She was Milton's, one of his youngest daughters, and she married this guy by the last name of Slater. I never met him. But Aunt Frances was over the mission in the AME church down in Madison. And in her last few years, she lived with my grandmother across from where we're sitting now. She stayed with her and until she passed away. Okay, so that concludes the people that I knew, or the founders that I knew. I'm glad you asked that question. It brought back a whole lot of memories.
My pleasure. I think, Gus, you said you didn't recall any of the founders?
No, due to my age, I didn't know any.
Okay, and with TR was your grandfather, right? Or great grandfather, correct?
And Lula was your great grandmother.
Who I know that died in 1966. They lived at 266 Boone Avenue, and I actually have copies of her obituary for family members to see if they would like to gain more information.
Okay, for the both of you, what are your earliest recollections of the reunion or fondest memories?
So if you don't mind, Doug, I'd like to go first on that one.
You got it.
Okay. So my fondest memory is being fortunate enough to live right down the road, less than a quarter mile from the reunion. And every second weekend in August was a festive time, because as a young lad growing up from 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, we would hear the rumblings coming weeks ahead of time. The reunion is getting ready to take place. The reunion is getting ready to take place. And, we'd be excited. So we would stand, before the reunion would even start, we would stand on the riverbank and watch the cars come up the road. And it would be such a festive time, be like, wow, look at that car. One day I'm going to have a car just like that one, because the Smoots were very, very successful people. And we would just be amazed at the type of people, the people they were, the vehicles that would come. And, it was just a great weekend, starting from Friday evening all the way on Saturday up to Sunday, which was the formal program. And it was always the greatest time to see the people that you haven't seen all year. Most of the family, and there's a bunch of us, you don't see them during Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, or anything else. But everybody comes in for the reunion, and Madison actually comes alive during that time. And not only was it great for the Smoot Family Reunion, but it was great for the entire town of Madison, West Virginia, and Boone County. I mean, it was just a great, great time. So lots of great memories. I would be here forever and ever.
All righty.
And it was economically progressive for the town of Madison, because all of we had a motel in Danville, which was filled up with people coming to the reunion. We filled up the one in Madison. Actually, there was 2 in Madison. And we filled up the one on Corridor G in Charleston. And we had quite a few of them that went to the Holiday Inn downtown Charleston.
Okay.
Yes. So we had a business and labor editor from the Charleston Gazette. Charleston Gazette was the biggest newspaper in West Virginia. It was called the state newspaper. And Mr. Peaks was the editor. And Mr. Peaks wrote about how the Smoots reunion helped to bring about to build the economy here in West Virginia. And he happened to become so interested in the Smoot reunion that he wrote 4 separate articles about the Smoot reunion. The first one was in 1973. And then he wrote another one a few years later, and he had them spaced out all the way up to about 2004. And he was also one of our guest speakers here one time. Mr. Peaks lived to be about 95 years old, and he was one of the most respected business and labor editors in the state of West Virginia. Now, Another thing that I remember very, very well, I was at this reunion and they called out people who were here from other places. And we had people from 12 different states, all the way from California to New York, down to Florida, all the way up to Minnesota. And we had a lady who you mentioned a few minutes ago, Carolyn Matthews. Mm-hmm. She was here from China because she was teaching English over there. I can't remember the city, but she was here that day. She had been in China. And a guy, one of our relatives married a Japanese lady, and he came in for the reunion, brought her here, and from Japan. And then another relative happened to be on vacation in England, and he came in for the reunion. So here we had people from 12 different states and 3 countries. That was around 1982, 82, 83, somewhere in there. Now, another big memory was the dedication of the first pavilion. It was dedicated on a Saturday, and of course the mayor was here. We had newspapers from Madison, and of course the Charleston Gazette and Daily Mail were here. And we had the Logan Banner from Logan, West Virginia. We had the mayor from Madison to cut the ribbon. Also, later on in the program, he didn't make it on time, was the Secretary of State. He came for the ribbon cutting. And I can remember my grandmother. She was the last founder that was still alive from my memory. I can't remember any others being here at that time. And she was so happy. She was sitting on the front row, and she was just, she was happy. You could just tell that was one of the greatest events in her life, being a founder. And it was on her and her husband's property, right. Joe and Nora Smoot's property, where it is held now, on their property. Yes.
And if I could kind of segue off of that just a little bit. So all of the great people that Doug just mentioned that came to this reunion, as a young man as well, I remember, we wasn't the richest. Of course, we wasn't the poorest, but we was pretty close. But the reunion actually provided an opportunity. And there's an old saying that says, education is the key to success. And with all the people that he mentioned, that was actually an opportunity. I remember as a young man being 8 years old, 9 years old, and you could look up to those people and they would talk to you and they would tell you how they obtained their success, what they had to do. And, they would actually give you a roadmap to follow, which I credit to a lot of the success that I have today, is I credit from the Smoot Family Reunion. And not only did you have role models and mentors, but I actually received one of the scholarships. And the scholarship was a gift to the students who went to the Smoot Family Reunion. And today, young kids will look at those as just a gift, but that actually gave me the ability to buy my books while going to college, enabled me to actually make it through college. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to give a lot of my success for what I have today is from the individuals who were at this very reunion.
That was a Smoot Scholarship, which is still given out each year. Yes. And Gus, that reminds me of something. The very last election that we had of officers, every one of the officers, I understand, received a Smoot Scholarship.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And every officer was a college graduate. Every one of our officers. And, they all were part of the Smoot Scholarship. Yes, indeed. I remember when Gus was president for almost 8 years. I was his treasurer, And Gus, I counted it up. Gus gave away 35 scholarships during his tenure. 35 Smoot scholarships. Yes, indeed.
All righty, great information. I appreciate that. And now we have a special presentation of the Smoot family history as presented via the Underground Railroad with Joseph Saunders.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Joseph Gus Saunders, former president of the Smoot Family Reunion. And today I would like to discuss with you some of the hypotheses of Milton Smoot and how he navigated the plight to the Underground Railroad. So behind me, I have a quilt, a very special quilt, very special quilt to this family that was actually pieced together by my sister, Lenora Saunders. She was with a group called the Quilting Queens in Cleveland, Ohio, and together they put this quilt together, and very special to this family. So not only but everybody knows how to read it, so I'm going to try to do my best to educate it on you this morning. So the quilt is part of the history from a lady by the name of Miss Odella in Charleston, South Carolina. And they put together some pieces of a quilt to tell you how to navigate the Underground Railroad. Now, I have to be upfront and tell you that this theory has been challenged by a few, but not many, that are the theories accurate. So the challenge that people gave was, is the quilt accurate? And if not, why is it not accurate? So what they were trying to say is the quilt is not accurate because it's not written down. So I call that nonsense, because back in those days, in the late 1800s and 1850s, 1860s, when you were going through the Underground Railroad, we all know that the punishment for being able to read and write was death. So you're not going to be able to find any writings on the theory of the Underground Railroad. But what we do have is we have a group we call the griot. And what proves the theory correct is that griot tells the story over and over and over again, and is told so many times. Thus, scholars have maintained with the telling of the story that the story is true and accurate. So how do you check that to make sure that the griot were actually being accurate? So you hear the story over and over and many times. So we have a thing called the Green Book. And the Green Book told people when they traveled America, back during the early times, early 1900s, when you traveled the country, you had the Green Book that told you the route to take, where you could stay, where you couldn't stay, and the places you could stay for the night, which is pretty much the same theory that we used in the Underground Railroad in navigating the Underground Railroad. So from there, that's a small enough history to kind of get you started. What I'd like to talk about today is the Underground Railroad and how we use that theory on how Milton Smoot traveled from Tazewell County, Virginia to Boone County, West Virginia, the spot that we're standing today. So the story begins back in the 1860s, right prior to the Civil War, prior to the first cannonball being fired that actually fought off the Civil War. So researchers told us in Tazewell County, Virginia, that Milton Smoot lived in Tazewell County, Virginia, and we were actually able to track the plantation he was on, and it was a plantation called Piney Cove. So how do we know that it was Piney Cove? Well, research tells us in Tazewell County, Virginia, during that time, that there was a very few number of slaves. In the town, there were fewer than 8% of people who were the slaves, and all of them lived on Piney Cove. So that theory pretty much tells us where Milton came from. So I mentioned Piney Cove to start the story of the Underground Railroad. So if you look behind me, and I'll use this pointer as a reference. So the first one you see is called the monkey wrench. And when Milton was on Piney Cove, the monkey wrench told you to get your tools together, that we're going to be traveling the Underground Railroad pretty soon, because they had to escape, because if they didn't, the punishment would have been horrible, horrible death. They did such things to the slaves, such as the women, they used them for medical experiments. Um, they would do gynecology without any anesthesia. And the men, they would take them and they would use them. They did brutal things to actually kill the people. So the monkey wrench actually tells you, get your tools together. We're going to be traveling out tonight, or we're going to be going. And the second one is what you call the wagon wheel. And there's actually two of those. One is the wagon wheel, and the second is what you call the carpenter's wheel. And when you saw the wagon wheel or the carpenter's wheel, that told you that we were going to be leaving tonight. So back in those days, we didn't have radio, we didn't have telephone, we didn't have email, we didn't have any of the modern fixtures that we have today. So how did the slaves communicate with each other? They communicated through song. And there's an old Negro spiritual talk that says, can we break bread on our knees, O Lord? Can we break bread on our knees? As I raise my knees to the rising sun, O Lord, have mercy on me. And that's how the slaves would pass the message to watch out for the quilt code on the Underground Railroad. So when you heard that song, that told you that another quilt was going to come up. So the first one was the monkey wrench. The second one is what we call the wagon wheel. And the wagon wheel, which means we're going to be leaving tonight. And so that night, which would usually be on a holiday, preferably a time during Christmas or a time during a holiday where the slave master would get drunk and you would have 4 or 5 days to travel without anybody knowing what you were doing. So as you got onto the Underground Railroad, it's not just something that you did. You had to be mentally ready, you had to be physically ready, and you had to be spiritually ready, because once you got out there, there was no coming back. Once you got out there, the punishment for coming back and escaping would be death, and they would make an example against you. So as you were traveling the Underground Railroad, the first place that you did, you would come to the next phase, which would be called the bear claw. And as you got to the bear claw, the reason for the bear claw, as you were traveling, you would follow the route, and it would tell you, follow the path of the bear. Go into the woods, because where the bear goes, you can usually find fresh water, you can find berries, you can find fruit, and you can find food. Where the slave master wasn't likely to follow you during the bear tracks, because he wouldn't go there because of the bear. So it goes back to, again, you had to be mentally and physically and spiritually ready. And another group that you would find during the route of the Underground Railroad, you would find the Indians. And part of our history tells us that when Milton Smoot was traveling the Underground Railroad, he was married to a woman by the name of Sarah Chapman, who we can actually trace back and determine to be an Indian. So he actually, as you followed the bear tracks, that got you further away from the plantation. And the next quilt that you would come upon would be what you call the basket. And the basket to these days is kind of like a hotel, the Hilton, Red Roof Inn, or something like that. You could stop long enough on the basket to get you, to get a little bit of rest, but you had to keep going, because you had to keep in mind, once they determined that you had done escaped, then you had to keep moving, because they were trying to capture you. And as you got through with the basket, the next phase you came to is what you call the crossroads, which is the pattern behind me now, is the crossroads. And it's similar to the signs, like if you're traveling to West Virginia from, let's say, Cleveland, Ohio, to Madison, West Virginia, you would see the signs that said Interstate 79, Interstate 64, 119 to Madison, West Virginia. You didn't have those patterns back then, so you would actually have the crossroads pointing into the direction, which means is where you should go, which usually was in a northerly direction to keep you traveling the path of the Underground Railroad. After you went through the Underground Railroad a little further, the next one that you ran into would be what you call the log cabin. The log cabin you could actually go into, and you could actually have rest for the night. And while you're in while you're in the log cabin, you could stay for the night. But how did you know that you can go into that particular cabin? As you're traveling the Underground Railroad, that quilt pattern would have been hanging out on the fence post. And there were certain signs that you looked for. One, the quilt was on the fence post. Two, when you looked at the cabin, you would have a lone rocking chair standing on the porch by itself. That would be two patterns that you would know that it was you could have safety. But if you looked at all those and somebody came out, maybe a person who actually was in the house and worked in the house, and they put a red dot in the middle of the pattern, that would tell you that there's problems with coming to that cabin, that you're going to probably some harm is going to happen to you. So you can stay at the cabin, rest up, get your feet healthy again, because you probably had bruises on your feet, and you need to get healthy as you travel the path. So once you left the Underground Railroad, the next one you came to is called the shoe fly. And the shoe fly told you, take off them old slave clothing and try to find you some different clothing to try to blend into, so you could look more like people who were normalized in normalized society, and you wouldn't stick out so much. So usually you got those not by shopping at any local department store, but you got them by stealing them off of somebody's clothesline, because the people who were like worked in the house Negro would purposely put them on the line so you could get those clothes and you could change and get rid of your old slave clothing. The next one is called the bow tie. And the bow tie tells you, once you change your clothing, you've made it far enough up north to where you could actually take a bride at this point. You could actually get married, you could have children, but you wasn't safe. But you could actually put on the bow tie or dress up to the point where you could have a bride. Now the bow tie actually had a different meanings. One of it, if you think of the pattern of the bow tie, it's actually a bow tie. But if you actually took that pattern and you turn it upside down, it's actually what you call an hourglass. And the hourglass says that you actually have so many hours to get you, because people are coming and you need to hurry up and get away from that, get away from them premises and continue following the Underground Railroad, which he did. So as he traveled further along the Underground Railroad, not all the travel was using by feet or an ox cart or something like that. You actually traveled by boat. So the next sign that you would see would be the boat. And as you traveled the boat, as you would keep going, that was your method of safety. Usually you would sneak onto the boat, and you just didn't pay fees, but you would sneak onto the boat and you would hide in the commodities that they had, and you would just keep traveling that way. So once you got off the boat, and as you traveled a little bit further, how did you know that you were going north? So animals tell us a lot. Geese tells us a lot. The birds tells us a lot, and even animals tells us a lot. So as you're traveling, you would watch up in the sky, and you would see the birds traveling north. So that would tell you to walk in a northerly direction, and you were traveling north to get to the Underground Railroad. So as you traveled north, you would be getting closer to the north where you were going to. You would see a sign called the Drunkard's Path. And the Drunkard's Path would tell you, don't walk in a straight direction, walk in a zigzag pattern, because people were trying to capture you and take you back to the plantation that you came from. And then as you traveled the Drunkard's Path, usually you would see another boat, and that would take you across the Ohio River, because our history tells us that Milton Smoot traveled from Tazewell County, Virginia, up to Boone County, West Virginia, and prior to that, to get all the way to freedom, you crossed into Ohio, and total freedom is you traveled into Canada from Ohio. And then after that, you saw the North Star, and that's where you had complete freedom. And that's the plight of the Underground Railroad as the Smoot family history is told.
over catering the food in. So those were key thoughts that she brought up, and I thought it was interesting to mention that. And that did bring up a memory of mine, or a rumor or question of mine, and that is, why do we have it the second Sunday in August? And I always thought it was primarily because of the harvest, and food was more plentiful then during that time. But in actuality, she says that may be the case, but she thought it was more in line with the school year. We had a number of educators in our family, and August was a more convenient time because it was the end of summer, and our educators were able to get their profession in order. So, and with that, I would like to say thank you first of all, to Doug and Gus for joining me and being here to share, and thank you for your time.
Glad to be here.
I appreciate that. Goodbye.